Welcome to the U World Order Showcase podcast, where we feature life, health, and transformational coaches being the change they seek in the world. If you'd like to be featured on our podcast to share what you're contributing to making the world a better place for us all, please go to www.jointheuworldorder.com. Be sure to like and follow our podcast for the latest episodes. Hi, and welcome to the U World Order Showcase podcast. I'm your host, Jill Hart, and with us today is Megan Mary. Megan is a dream analyst, a metaphysical mystery author, and founder of the Women's Dream Analysis. She works with clients all over the world, offering dream interpretation, women's empowerment transformative journeys, and spiritual awakening guidance. She's also the host of a podcast called Women's Dream Enlightenment, and this is a podcast for women which features deep discussions, dream interpretations, and spiritual stories of awakening. Welcome to the show, Megan. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you, Jill. I'm really excited to be here.
So let's start at the beginning. How did you get into doing dream analysis and dream interpretations and this wandering into the woo, as they say?
Yes. Well, I've always been fascinated with dreams. Of course, we spend so much of our lives in that state, and we don't really understand why or what the purpose is. And I had that question ever since I was little. I used to have recurring nightmares as well as fascinating flying dreams, and I was just really interested in finding out more. I knew there was more, but no one really seemed to hold the answers. And it led me down a path of really just being very inquisitive, looking into everything that was esoteric or occult or metaphysical or new age or woo or whatever those things are classified as. And I also studied a lot academically, from astronomy and philosophy and sociology and mythology, all of that, and really incorporated it all together to the point that I guess when I was in my early adulthood, I started ignoring my dreams and I wasn't paying attention at all. And then later on, I developed a series of chronic illnesses and started doing a lot of self work, shadow work, inner work, meditating, reflection, and opened up that door again. And when I did, I started to receive a lot of guidance in my dreams and a lot of messages, information, and very emphatically it was that I needed to go out into the world and do this. And of course, at the time, I was like, no way, I'm not ready to do that. And so it took a lot of overcoming a lot of challenges and self-limiting beliefs and doubts and all of that to step into that role. But it really felt like something I don't even really have a choice, and I have to go as fast as I can to get there. And so that was creating my podcast, that was creating my business of working with women, doing dream work, and helping them understand the benefits of it.
So what is dream work? And I know that not everybody recognizes that they dream every night. I've always remembered my dreams, but there are people I know, because my husband doesn't remember his dreams very often. I'm like, well, you're spending all this time asleep. Surely you were going to remember what you were dreaming about. It's like, nope.
Yes. So there's a couple answers to that question. The first is that we all do dream, whether we're remembering them or not. So we're going in and out of REM sleep throughout the night and spending 90 minutes or so in that state and lapsing back and forth. And many times we won't remember because we're not trained to do so. We're not paying attention. It is a practice like meditation or yoga or any other practice that you have to apply intent to remember them, because we're transitioning through brainwave states and we're conditioned to ignore them. So we're not necessarily going to automatically remember them unless there is a significant emotional trigger attached. because our brain experiences the dreams from an emotional standpoint as if we were awake. And so sometimes we'll have nightmares or other emotionally charged dreams that we will remember simply because of the emotional reaction. But otherwise, we might not remember the rest of them unless we're doing the practice of keeping the dream journal, trying to take the pause in the morning to remember them. Now, the other piece is that women tend to be better dream recallers. And this has been explored in various studies and books. One of them, Patricia Garfield has a book called Women's Bodies, Women's Dreams, where she talks about women's estrogen level affecting the amount of dream recall that women have. And she's also done many studies where they will have both men and women write down their dreams and then strip whose name was on it and have them compared and say, well, do you think this is a man or a woman's dream? And the women will always write down a more detailed dream record. So that naturally makes it easier to do that work because we are more predisposed to remember them. So that's some of the reasons.
Interesting. And why would people want to remember their dreams? How do you, I've got like so many questions. So we'll just start with that one and then
Yes.
I don't want to
Well,
pepper
many
you with
people,
all of
first
them.
off, don't appreciate them. So they don't understand, one, why we're having them, or two, why we need to remember them. So for anyone that is interested in self-discovery work, doing any sort of self-help, dreams are another pathway to our intuition, our higher self, our universal wisdom, the parts of ourselves that we might be cloaking from ourselves, the parts that we could grow. It's so much in our subconscious because our conscious is only 5% of our mind and our subconscious is 95% of our mind. So do we want to tap into that? Do we want to know what's behind that veil? And what's the benefit of doing so? It allows us a much more holistic understanding of ourselves, as well as tapping into that universal field of knowledge that we may be just essentially living in a dream in our waking life. We're asleep. We're not using all of our mind, all of our experiences, and we're not giving ourselves an opportunity to advance. So I really feel that dreams are, for me, a pathway to spiritual intelligence. And we know how important they have been traditionally in the psychology field. And so obviously there's benefits there, but also it just in the arts, for example, the creative potential of dreams and so much more. There's so much promise in the field of dream work, and it really hasn't fully been embraced in culture yet.
Is there, let me ask it this way. I know when I dream, I dream in symbols and metaphors almost, and like things happen to me and I have adventures and it's almost like I'm living another life in my dreams. And sometimes other people that have passed will come and talk to me and they'll tell me things. Um, how, do you help people? I want to say interpret, but it is interpretation. I help them to like understand what these things mean. Like I can have dreams about lions. Sometimes lions are attacking me. Sometimes I'm working with the lions. Sometimes it's tigers. Sometimes it's, they're perfectly kind, and other times I'm really afraid they're going to get me. Um, I, I know that they mean something. Do you help people understand what your dreams are trying to tell you? I guess it's
Yes, and although it is interpretation, the method that I use that I've devised really puts the dreamer in the driver's seat. And so as
Mhm.
opposed to me saying, well, I'm going to get out my A to Z dictionary and I'm going to look up lion, and lion archetypally or culturally means this. And so there's your answer, and that's what it means for you, isn't the approach that I use, because your experience with lions is going to be completely different from mine. and your opinions about them, your emotional attachment, your perception, everything is going to be different. And so when those symbols show up in a dream, they mean something unique to you, and they're part of a larger story also. So when you use a dream dictionary, you're looking up something alphabetically by the first letter of that word, and you're just looking up that thing. And you're not getting the premise and everything surrounding it. So we do want to look at the little pieces, but we always also want to look at the 1,000-foot view. What if this dream were a story, would you call it? What's happening in the dream? What's your emotional reaction? Who else is there? What is the landscape and all of those things? And derive from that a message that is relevant to your waking life. Because our dreams don't necessarily tell us what we already know. They're trying to reveal things to us that can help us, but in a symbolic language. And so it's learning to decode that and essentially establishing your own dream lexicon so that you can then recognize them in future dreams, understand the trajectory of your dream stories.
And do you find that people's dreams change over time?
Absolutely, yes. Because your life is changing, right?
Mhm.
So if you're experiencing a transition in your life, or you're overcoming challenges, or you're stepping into a new way of being, or you're questioning things, all of that's going to be reflected in your dreams. And when you start to do dream work, you're pulling those threads from the subconscious into the conscious, and then that's synergistically going to affect the content of your dreams.
That's so interesting. And why why do why do people forget their dreams? But why would there's just so much about dreams. Personally, I look at it as like I can't wait to go to sleep at night, and it's like I'm opening the door and I'm walking through.
Yes. Yes. Uh, there's a lot of reasons. Okay. So sometimes people will say, well, I want to talk about this dream that happened 10 years ago. So they haven't forgotten. Some dreams stay with you for a long time because they're very powerful. Other people, like you said, will say, well, I don't think I dreamed last night. I haven't had a dream in months. They're just not remembering them. And they're not remembering them because they're not using the practice and the tools to do that, to work that dream recall muscle. And also because maybe they don't want to hear those messages. So you can subconsciously or consciously say, that's gibberish, or that's not important to me, or I know that there's something there, but I'm not ready to hear that message. And so then it's going to quietly go away. It's just like if you decide to pay attention to synchronicities in your life or not, you can dismiss them and say, well, that's just a silly coincidence. It means nothing. Or you can say, isn't it weird that? And then start following those breadcrumbs till you see more and more and you start to realize that there's something to it.
So did dreams tend to run in cycles? Like you dream about a chunk of information and the story kind of continues, like a television series.
Yes, and there's been studies that have said that the dreams earlier in the night are not technically usually as complex and as long, that we spend longer in REM as the night goes on, and that many times the ones that are earlier in the night can appear to be, although they're not entirely, more, I don't want to say regurgitations of the day, but more pedantic. And then as we go along, they can become more epic, more saga-like, more longer because we're spending longer time and we're deeper into that state.
And how long do dreams generally last?
There is research, I was just reading the other day that when they did some of the initial REM tracking, that the time in the dream does to some extent correspond to the REM time. Although, when you start to look at dreams from a spiritual perspective, you lose the constraint of time. So, other planes of existence, other levels of dimensionality are constrained to the space and time continuum. So if we are, in fact, spirits having a human experience, and if maybe we're returning to that spiritual state during the dream state, then we are releasing ourselves from those constraints. And maybe that is why when we say, I feel like I was just away for a month or years took place in that seeming hour, uh, that could be why, because we are constraining ourselves to these presupposed limitations of the hours on the clock. But when we step into that world, it doesn't go by those rules.
If you look at it in the opposite way, where how long does REM generally last for
It can
people?
be 90 minutes, I mean, at the longest. So it could be much shorter in the beginning,
And you
half
you
hour.
cycle through it several
Hmm.
times during the night,
Right.
and it kind of corresponds with how your body's repairing itself. I know that
Yes.
different times of the night, your body is working on different organs, um,
Yes. And it's
systems.
interesting to me that as humans, we can't go without sleep. And even if we try to go without even without that, we also can't go without REM.
Mhm.
So even if we have a little rest, but we don't get REM, there is a backlash. There is a dramatic effect on our psyche. And so I find it so interesting how imperative that is and how that's been clinically proven, but yet in society, it's still dismissed as nonsensical.
Yeah, it's an easy way to drive people crazy. And they use this as a torture device. They'll
Right.
keep the lights on, they'll make noise. So you can't get into the REM part of sleep. And
Yes.
people, seriously, they lose their minds.
Yeah,
It's just
absolutely.
a little bit different is that when you put people in solitary confinement for long periods of time, it also drives them crazy. It's the most cruel and unusual punishments are those two pieces
Yes.
without actually even touching the person.
Right. Yep. It's fascinating. I mean, I was just reading about this study where these people actually were conducting a study in a lab, sleep lab, and they wanted to see if they deprived them of sleep, what the effects would be versus depriving them of REM. And when they deprived them of REM, they had to actually cancel or end the research study early because they were inducing psychosis in all of the participants.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
it's so fascinating. And it's psychosis is really kind of when the dream world comes over and overlaps into the reality that we experience with our conscious mind. It's like the subconscious, it's got to come out. So it bleeds
Right.
over into consciousness, and you have trouble differentiating between the two experiences, I guess is
Mhm.
the best way to
Mhm.
put it. I wonder if multiple personalities isn't kind of along those lines too. Am I?
Well, I think that there are a lot of instances of quote unquote psychosis that don't have they can't be explained on the spiritual realm.
Mhm.
So many paranormal experiences, so many supernatural things that people experience that the psychology board is going to say you're insane, but that may not be the truth of that experience from a spiritual perspective. It's just not accepted here because there's a certain way that we're supposed to exist and behave and so on and so forth, confined within the constraints of what we have proven to be true and what we
What we
accept.
can, yeah, what we've generally agreed upon, whether it's true or not, is not
Correct.
always the same. And that
Correct.
that does change over time as different
Yes, it does.
experiences happen. And I think as women have gotten into the scientific realm and doing studies, because men and women's minds work differently.
Hmm.
And for the longest time, and this is why a lot of women ended up in institutions and sanitariums, and they did all those electric shock treatments. Those were mostly done on women who they were trying to make like men, but we're not like men. Our minds, our psyches work differently than a man's psyche. You were just saying, we're more detailed in our dream recall.
Yes, yes. And Patricia Garfield actually talks about the differences in the mind structure and operation. It's very fascinating what you were just saying, how they are quite different. So it's important to acknowledge that, and also just really interesting to research.
Mhm. I, I think it's fascinating. And I'm so excited that women are getting into this field and they are exploring it. People like you, that, they're saying, hey, let's look at what you're dreaming about and how is that designed to serve you instead of just, oh yeah, I had a dream about. Um, what is your dream work process? I know you have our dream mirror method, I guess is.
Yes, so I developed this method that really works in four steps. The first step is really acknowledging that we need to start remembering the dreams and how we do that. And so it's starting to keep the practice, the mindful practice of the dream journal. And when you record your dreams, giving your dreams a title, as if it were a short story. How would you describe this in one quick phrase if you had to sum it up? And then not glossing over, not over summarizing, really writing down every detail that you can remember. And, I try to coach people on the things to pay attention to because many times once I get that dream record and we start talking about it, inevitably they will say, well, now that we're talking about it, it really did look like this. And that really makes me think of this. And I had this feeling that it was like this. And there's all these things that are happening that you might not even write down at the time. The second step is mood, and that's where we pay attention to the emotions in the dream. As I was discussing before, our limbic system in our brain controls our emotions. And when we're dreaming, that part of our brain is completely active and on. There's other parts that are turned off, like we don't get up and walk around unless we have sleepwalking issues, and many other things are turned off, but that in the logical part, but the emotional part is fully active. And so, what was the mood that we experienced before we went to sleep? What did we experience during the dream? And then when we woke up, how did we feel? And those can all be different, but just acknowledging that the mood is a key indicator. The third stage is what I call mirror. And that's really where, as opposed to being a dream dictionary, I try to hold up a veritable mirror to your subconscious and ask a series of questions and say, okay, well, who is there? Tell me about this person in real life, or is it a celebrity that you don't know? What's your opinion about this person? And what was the landscape? Where were you at your home? Were you at your childhood home? Were you at school or work or someplace you've never been? What were the actions that you or someone else were doing? And really get all of those little puzzle pieces together so that we're acknowledging the objects. Sometimes there's colors or numbers or weather, all of those things that stood out. And then the fourth stage is metaphor, and that's where we look at the dream as a symbolic story that is a parable of sorts that is bringing across a message that is a metaphor for a situation in your waking life. And what is that situation? And what can we take from that message to then integrate into our path forward to help us grow and understand ourselves and the world better?
Do you find people can ask questions like before they go to sleep and get their dreams to answer questions?
You definitely can. And that is called dream manifestation or dream incubation, where you're really setting your mind to work. Gail Delaney has a book called The 24-Hour Mind, and that's really what that is about, that your mind is always working and it can work for you, and you can ask it questions, and you can ask, whether you feel it's another part of your mind, your subconscious, or whether you feel it's your spirit guides or past on loved ones or other versions of yourself and other parallel realities, whatever you feel it is that you're tapping into, you can ask guidance for that. And so you can find solutions to things. You can discover new options, other ways to deal with situations, or other pathways that maybe you thought were closed to you by reflecting on that, either just mentally or writing it down in your journal before you go to sleep.
I like this a lot. I have practiced that and it's so fun. I'll ask a question and then I'll consciously be aware looking for the answer because it might not even come in the dream. It might come in the next day or two, just kind of out of the blue. You'll just hear the answer to like specific questions. It's like, oh, okay.
Yes, and that's clairaudience when you actually hear the answer. And that's really one of the ways. And also sometimes when you're in that state between sleeping and waking, you can hear the answer. And other times you'll say, well, I asked this question and I had this dream, but this has nothing to do with that. Well, maybe it does, but you have to apply that method. You have to say, okay, how is this not literal? And maybe symbolically, this is offering an answer.
And we're really working with it. So how do you help people? Is it like one-on-one? Is it in groups?
Yes, it's all one-on-one virtual sessions,
Mhm.
and women can book the time and then they submit their dream. And then when we meet, I go over the dream with them in
Mhm.
full detail. And you can hear examples of this on my podcast when I do the live dream sessions. It gives you a good bird's eye view of what it's like. And then once we discover, okay, here's what this really could mean, and here's how I think this applies to my life, then I do what I call dream integration, where I actually offer different types of modalities, whether it's affirmations or journal prompts or sound frequencies, to help you integrate the knowledge that you've learned. So you don't just walk off going, okay, I get it now, but what do I do with that? I don't know what to do now. So it gives you an opportunity to integrate it, heal, do that healing step, take that next step that is presented in the dream. And I also have programs where I work for 90 days together doing that process over and over again so that you really start to see from day 1 to day 90 the progress that you've made. You start to understand the process of how you can do this yourself moving forward, and also the progression in the dream content as you're starting to interface with it and starting to become more aware of both sides of your existence.
So would you say that you work with sort of two sorts of people? One is somebody who had a dream and they're just like, I know this is significant. I really need to talk to somebody about what this means.
Yes.
Um, it's more of a one-off situation. And then there's people that they know that dreams are powerful and that they can really help them. So you're going to start at ground zero and say, okay, these are the steps you need to implement before you go to sleep. And while you're sleeping, these are, there's preparatory work, I guess, that you need to do in order to retain that dream. And then your process in the morning for recording all of the information and making sure that you have time. You don't schedule things in the morning so that you have time to have the recall and you have a space where you can be alone, and maybe you have a ritual or something that you do with it. But those are the kinds of things. And over 90 days, you develop a really big picture in answer to it. Maybe you start out with a question, or um, you want to know which direction you should be going. You're looking for feedback. Is that
Yes, absolutely. And I call those programs the dream empowerment programs because they're
Mhm.
really meant to empower you to understand how to do the process and then to move forward with it on your own for the rest of your life so that you're tapping into that. And it also gives you an opportunity to actively take part in your own healing. So the sound frequency aspect is that in one of my programs, I will create a guided visual meditation that has sound frequency healing overlaid
Mhm.
while I am walking you through a scenario of your choosing of your dream. So whatever several of the dreams chosen from that period, so that you can reimagine a different ending. And so that you have the opportunity to actively play a part in the manifestation of the choose your own ending of the dream.
I love that. I like that a lot. So I know that you offer a gift, uh, and that's in terms of a dream mirror journal. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's basically just a one sheet that you can get download from my site when you sign up to be on my list. And it gives you the boxes for the 4 steps of the method that we've talked about today, and
Mhm.
just gives you a framework for your own dream journal to what you should be paying attention to, how you can record it, and lets you understand just to start getting into that habit of giving it a title, writing down your mood, because you want to capture your emotional reaction. And so it's just a little primer towards that.
And how can people get in touch with you if they want to explore this further with you? Because it's really
Yes.
fascinating.
Yeah,
Like,
so you can
what?
find me at meganmary.com, and that is where you can book a session with me. You can also explore my podcast, which is Women's Dream Enlightenment. And I also have an online self-paced course that will walk you through steps for dream recall. It'll cover all of the things that we talked about today, but in more in depth. And it gives you that opportunity to learn it on your own. Like I said, I also have those 90-day programs, and I also have my book on there, which is really an exploration into learning how to tap into your dreams, but in the fictional landscape of fantasy and mystery.
Oh, that sounds fascinating.
Yes. It just came out in October. It's called The Dream Haunters. That's the first book. The
Mhm.
series is called Witches of Maple Hollow. And each book is really following the main character Hannah's spiritual awakening journey through her dreams. There's alternating dream scenes throughout the books, and it really is, a metaphysical adventure that teaches at the same time.
Such a great way to incorporate information into your subconscious when you can kind of just slide it in there sideways
Yes.
while it's having a good
Yes.
time.
Yes. Enlightening and educating. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, perfect. So this has been a fascinating conversation, Megan. I really appreciate you coming on. What's the one thing that you hope the audience takes away from our discussion?
Listen to your dreams. They really hold messages for you. I believe that they are the key to not only our intuition, but to being more in alignment with our full purpose. And there's so much waiting behind that door for you.
I love that. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us for the U World Order Showcase podcast. Remember, if you would like to be featured on this podcast as a life, health, or transformational coach, please visit www.jointheuworldorder.com. We look forward to talking to you next time as we present another life, health, or transformational coach being the change they seek in the